this whole idea of like therapy talk. If a guy is on a first date talking about, oh, look, this is really hard for me to tell you, but like, I go to therapy because it's really great. Keep those blinkers wide open for people who may use that as a way to try and prove that they are something that they're not.
Now, you guys know, or you might not know, but you will now, I am a sucker for Love is Blind. So Love is Blind, if you haven't seen it, it's like a very modern dating show where there's a bunch of men and a bunch of women and they go into these pods that are separated. Pods, it's just a room, right? But they go into these pods that's separated by these walls. The men are on one side, the women on the other. You go one woman per room, one man per room, and you talk to each other and you get to know each other and you write things down. You can send gifts through the room and stuff, but you never get to see each other.
One might think that it's based on the premise that someone's personality is more important than the way they look.
It's exactly what it is. The whole idea is love really blind? That's the question they pose.
The antidote to online dating, maybe?
Yeah, so it's like speed dating without seeing the other person. So all the people move between the pods. You get to speak to whoever you want, and then you form these connections. Then you decide if there's like maybe one or two people that you want to pursue. Then at the end, you have to have chosen your person blindly still. Then you get to meet. But the idea is you propose. You're getting married. You are getting married without having seen each other. Then you go on a honeymoon that everyone goes, and that's where sometimes the drama starts to happen because maybe one person might have had a connection with someone else, but chose the other person, but then when they see them, they're more physically attracted to the other person. Then it's like, do they leave? Do they swap partners? Do they commit? It gets spicy. The reason I wanted to talk about this is there's one particular scene that happened episode 2 at the very start between two people, Stephen and Monica, that sort of stopped me in my tracks a little bit. And I had to rewind it and say, did I just hear that correctly? So this happened in episode 2, season 7, straight at the start of episode 2, Stephen and Monica. They have a conversation that really got me thinking about therapy talk and are people using therapy talk to manipulate situations.
Here's what I believe. You like someone for their qualities, but you love someone for their flaws.
I've always been drawn to flaws.
Believe me, girl, I've been the same way.
Yeah.
Actually, my most recent relationship, since, we're already getting into this,
Yeah,
I
let's do
will
it.
divulge something that I am not very proud of at all.
Yeah.
But I wear this brand, and I think it's very important to be honest about it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about cheating.
Yep.
I technically hold the title of being a cheater. I've been cheated on multiple times as well. I believed that this person that I was dating at the time, I believed I didn't deserve her. Everyone has a different concept of cheating. One person's could be, looking at someone. Someone else's could be an actual physical act. I basically slid into a girl's DMs like a dumbass, and we were flirting with intention. You're emotionally cheating at that point. Mm-hmm. I got caught, which I knew I would. I was very disappointed with myself.
I'm so
And there was a lot
sorry.
we went through therapy. We figured it out. I'm actively in therapy to talk about these things.
And by the way, I really appreciate you sharing with me, and I want you to feel like you can tell me anything. Like, we're all human. I'm 36 years old. Like, it's not so black and white.
Right.
The experiences that I've had to deal with from cheating are, whew, they are
How's
like
the music?
really gross and very, very bad. And even in those situations, I've always found a path to forgiveness.
I love how he's managed to victimize himself in that cheating situation. Like, he's the one who acted outside of the relationship. And obviously, I know there's many reasons why people cheat. We've talked about that a load of times. But in that one conversation, he managed to make himself the victim and gain her pity for his cheating.
Oh, 100%. But even the way he set it up, you can tell he knows what he's doing. This is what I think. I think he 100% knew what the outcome was going to be. He was being vulnerable. He dropped that he went to therapy. He dropped that he only did it because he didn't feel like she was good enough because she was such a queen. And also when he says he's a cheater, so he says, I want to talk about cheating. I cheated, but I've been cheated on loads of times too. Like, he didn't even sit in I'm a cheater. He quickly went straight to, but I've been cheated on loads of times as
He
well.
went straight to, I'm a victim.
He went to straight to I'm a victim. And I had to rewind the whole scene. And I wonder how many people would have watched that and had an issue with it. There are some online threads going around, so I know that people have.
Interesting you bring up the online commentary, because I saw some things on Facebook groups and that kind of thing for Love is Blind that were very divided. And half of the people were like, hang on a second, he just made himself exactly how we all felt. He just made himself the victim in a narrative where he was actually the person doing the wrong thing. But the other half of people were saying, at least he's honest about it. Like, at least he's kind of coming forward with this information and she doesn't need to ask him these questions, and he's being truthful about his past experiences.
But I also think that that's been reflected recently in the whole David Grohl thing. Foo Fighters, if you guys are across it, which I'm sure you are, he has fathered a child outside of his 20-something year marriage. And the social discourse around that was so interesting, because some people were like, wow, what a flog. He cheated on his wife and had a baby with an adulterous affair. But the other part of the conversations was, well, at least he came out and he was honest and he's acknowledged the baby and he's going to be a good dad. What a great guy.
He's taking accountability for it.
Accountability. It is fascinating to me the way in which we are able to frame some things, and we can frame our shortcomings in a way that garner empathy and garner sympathy. And I'm not saying that this is black and white, because I do think that there are absolutely instances where someone's shortcomings and the things that they do that might hurt someone else very well can be the byproduct of the unfortunate situations that they've experienced themselves. But I do think that the language that's used is a way in order to gain favor, especially in this instance. As someone who hasn't seen the series, it got me thinking about an article I read recently, which was from Glamour. Now, it was from last year, but the article itself was talking about how a lot of women prefer to date men who are either in therapy or who have gone to therapy, because it shows that they are more emotionally in touch and that they're working on themselves and their own mental health. So I was speaking to Matt about this, and I was like, surely then if it is known that this is a desirable attribute that some women want, that women want men who are more emotionally in touch, surely this is something that can then be used as a way to kind of garner affection or get a woman over the line in terms of dating and to win favors. And Matt was like, talking about therapy is akin to talking about puppies. He's like, it is a green flag. If a guy is on a first date talking about, oh, look, this is really hard for me to tell you, but I go to therapy because it's really great. I think that there's a fine line between endorsing it, which we obviously do on this podcast, and we talk about how amazing it is to be able to go do therapy and be able to have moments to talk about yourself and work on your mental health. But I also think keep those blinkers wide open for people who may use that as a way to try and prove that they are something that they're not.
100% men know now. The bar is higher for what I think for a lot of women's expectations on men. And reading the article, so many women were like, I will only date somebody if they go to therapy. That is my prerequisite when I write my list of things I'm looking for. Tall, dark, handsome, men in finance, blue eyes, therapy. That's what they're adding. And I just think that that's a little bit excessive to make that a non-negotiable.
I question why that might be the case, because I think that the implication is that they are potentially at least more aware, perhaps, of their emotions if they're going to therapy. I mean, there will be exceptions. Some are court-mandated therapy, but
Always.
But I'm trying to think about the positives as to why women would be like, I want a guy who has been to therapy. And I think it's all about taking accountability for your own shit. And I think that it is somewhat dangerous for us to equate going to therapy with actually owning stuff and taking accountability for behavior.
Totally, yeah.
I don't think that these things automatically align. I do think it would be implied that they were perhaps slightly more aware of their shortcomings if they were going to therapy, but you also don't know why they're going.
I also really want to be careful with this, because I don't want this to sound at all like we're stigmatizing people who do go to therapy or people who talk about the fact that they go.
No, of course
And I
not.
think it's really important because it's not just gendered. There are a lot of very conscious and intentional men out there who are going to therapy, and it has been hugely beneficial to them. And they don't feel shame around talking about it. And therefore, that's the reason why they've brought it up. I think it's more so for me, this whole idea of like therapy talk is when someone has learnt the language, they've learnt the tools, they're not actually implementing it in their life, but they use it as a way to make themselves sound smarter, to make themselves seem like they are superior or authoritative in a way. And that almost like diminishes, especially within a relationship as well, it diminishes the thing that the other person might be experiencing because they're using terminology that is linked to therapy or linked to like psychoanalyzing someone. The example of this, and where I think we've seen it more recently in like social discourse, is the situation with Jonah Hill last year. So last year we saw Jonah Hill, we did a big episode on it, all around him using the word boundaries to set limitations on his ex-girlfriend, Sarah Brady, who he'd said, it's my boundary that you don't go and surf with other men. And
It's my boundary that you don't post a bikini photo.
It's my boundary that you behave in a way that I expect you to. And we unpacked on that episode this conversation around how a boundary is a limitation for yourself. It can't be a limitation for someone else. And that to me reeked of someone who had been to therapy, had learnt the tools, but then was intentionally abusing those tools in order to coercive control their partner in a relationship.
But at the end of the day, not everybody is cut from the same cloth. There could be people that go to therapy that are still wankers, women and men, right? You're still a dickhead. You're still going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
There are people that go to therapy that they come out the other side like Jesus. There are people that will never need to go to therapy and they're still wonderful people. Like, I think just putting that limitation on yourself for dating that you have to have gone to therapy, exactly like Keisha said, that doesn't align with them being an amazing person that's emotionally available and not going to cheat on you. Like,
in terms of talking about the ways in which we can abuse terminology, I think we see it beyond just dating though. I think we see it with the overuse of the word toxic, with the word trauma, with the word triggered, like
narcissist, sociopath.
Yeah, we might have a negative experience with someone who has treated us badly, and then we've instantly blanketed them as a narcissist, which is a pathological diagnosis. Like, you can't just have one interaction with someone who cheats on you or treats you badly. That doesn't instantly mean that they are narcissistic or a narcissist. I do think we overuse these words. For me, even in the industry that we work in, we have to be so careful with the things that we say from time to time. And we will often go, oh, should we put a trigger warning on this? Should we talk about the trauma that's associated with this? And I think we've almost become too trigger warning happy in a lot of ways, because something that someone might not want to listen to because it makes them feel uncomfortable or it's like not a nice listen, that's not necessarily a trigger. Like, a trigger is someone who has experienced a deeply traumatic event and will be triggered back to that moment. And I know that that's obviously something that is very real for some people, but there's been lots of studies around how trigger warnings are actually more negative, and trigger warnings themselves can more negatively impact a greater population than not having it in the first place. And this is not, look, I'm not saying that trigger warnings don't have a purpose. They absolutely do. And some people have experienced real trauma in their life, like truly horrific things. But it kind of is like point in case. It almost seems these days as though everybody has experienced trauma. Like, we use the word trauma to literally describe everything.
I think it's like the situation that everyone's experiences are subjective, right? So someone's trauma will be subjective, but a term like triggering is actually an objective word. And so the overuse of it, and I'm even guilty of this myself. I mean, on this podcast over the years, I would have described one of my ex's behaviors as narcissistic. And I think as we've kind of gone on and spoken to experts, I've actually realized that by me labeling that person as a narcissist, it actually has diluted the experience of someone who has actually experienced narcissistic abuse. And I really regret that. Like, I really regret amounting my experiences to something that someone really has been damaged by. And I think that's the problem with the overuse of these words.
But I feel the same about the word trauma. And you say that that's like a subjective experience. I think like people have gone through hardships and they've experienced things that have been difficult or they have been challenging to overcome. But there are people who have experienced trauma, and then there is people who have experienced something challenging in their life. And conflating the two, all that does is it minimizes the person's use of a very strong word when they've actually experienced something that was truly traumatic to them.
Yeah, but Keisha, I mean, I disagree with what you've said, because he might be a lesser narcissist than someone else, it doesn't mean he's not a narcissist.
Yeah, we know that relationship you had. He was a narcissist.
Like my ex with the double life and that did all that crazy things, he was also a narcissist. Was he on the same level as yours? No, he was worse. But I don't look at you and say, oh, because you use that term, it takes away from anyone else. Like, it's a spectrum, right? It's a spectrum.
I think it's about diluting the experiences of people who do experience, and it's not just about narcissism. You know, a lot of people say things like, I see it on TikTok all the time. Oh, I have trauma from one of my past relationships because my ex used to not write back to me for 24 hours and it would give me anxiety and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, let's actually unpack the words we're using here. You said I have trauma from a past relationship. To me, I just think that we've kind of gone a little bit too heavy into this therapy speak when we're using it in such a liberal way, because people have genuinely experienced really, really awful and traumatizing events in relationships, especially, you know, we talk about domestic violence a lot on this podcast. I just think that perhaps as a way to try and, you know, we love to put a label on everything. We love to have everything categorized. We love to have these buzzwords, and also words like this, especially when you're in therapy and you start using them in your general vocabulary, it implies a certain level of emotional intelligence. And I just think the pendulum might have swung a little too far. Like,
it's just overuse of the word. It's lost its meaning. It has an oversaturation. And I read a really interesting article from a teacher, a primary school teacher. No, sorry, high school teacher, but early, like 12, 13, 14. She wanted to stay anonymous because she didn't want it to get back to her kids. But she said she cannot believe the uses of these terms that she hears amongst preteens. So she says she has a really hard time trying to be delicate and understand and guide them, but also say you can't be using those words. So she's like, when they're referring to a breakup and they're 13 and 14, they're saying he's definitely a sociopath. Like, what a narcissist. Because they're seeing these terms on TikTok. When they break up with friends, they're using the same kind of words. When it's not, when like we would go back to our time.
Didn't even know what it was.
It's just a fight with a friend and you'll probably make up in a couple of weeks.
yeah,
But
someone can just be a dickhead. They don't have to be emotionally abusive. Someone can just be a wanker today. Doesn't mean that they're a sociopath.
You can be a fuckwit and not a narcissist.
Yeah.
Like, these things are not interchangeable. But I found that really interesting because that is who we are setting up. That is the future generation that don't quite grasp the true meaning of what these terms are because they have become standard vocabulary.
And interchangeable. Like, they've become interchangeable with just normal experiences that we are all going to go through as part of like figuring out how to socially exchange with other people.
And I know we were talking about it, Laura, the use of the terms that we throw around now. Like, when we have an argument with our partner, it's not an argument, it's gaslighting.
Oh, yeah. And look, it's a good way to win an argument, put it that way.
Oh, yeah.
If you
foolproof.
It's a bit of a trump card.
If you want to win an argument, tell your partner they're gaslighting you. Like, it won't go down well. You'll win, but you won't make up. You won't resolve anything.
It's like, I saw you sucking that dick. You're like,
No, I
don't
didn't.
gaslight me. There was no dick in my mouth.
But, you know, like, gaslighting is a real and intentional lie to try and distort someone else's perception of what they experienced. It is an intentful act. Whereas, like, we are all going to have disagreements and arguments with our partners where we don't see things the same way because our experience of what we just did and went through, or the way we spoke to each other, our perceptions around it were different. And it's funny because, like, Matt and I will sometimes, and, you know, like, I'm not sitting up on my pedestal here being like, oh, we shouldn't do this, because we all do it. We've all called our ex-boyfriends narcissists. We've all told someone that they're gaslighting us when they're probably not. Matt and I will have an argument and either he'll say it or I'll say it. You're gaslighting me. And what we are meaning by that is I'm trying to convey how I experience something and you're telling me I'm wrong, right? But when you actually unpick it and try and like get down to the root of it, really it's just two people who actually love each other, who have a lot of respect for each other, but we both experienced that fight or whatever the thing was that set us off differently. We both had a different perception of what happened. And so neither one of us is right. We're probably right 50-50. One person probably said something with a bit of tone. The other person probably had a bit of a fucking face or did something that made the other person feel inferior. And then it kicked off. It doesn't mean that just because we disagree with each other's perception that we're gaslighting each other either. And that's really important. And sometimes I have to stop myself and I'm like, he is not gaslighting you. He just had a different experience and he's fucking wrong.
Yeah. But it's funny because we can sit here, on our high horse and preach and say it's overused. But like you just said, we're all guilty of overusing it. But it's something that we need to start to be conscious about.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing. It's not like none of this is criticism. It's all just like awareness around what's the behaviors that we do and are we contributing to something that's like as a bigger picture could be slightly problematic.
I will throw myself under the bus. The theme of Ben's and my relationship is literally, this is how you made me feel when you said that. And then the other person says, but I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean to make you feel like that. And I think that comes down to a bit of maybe a language barrier. It's not the language barrier because his English is wonderful, but when things are directly translated from how he grew up into English, it doesn't come out sometimes the same way.
Like an interpretation barrier.
So I'll be like, I can't believe you said that. And he's like, but I didn't mean it like that. And I said, yeah, but this is how you made me feel. He's like, but that wasn't the intention. And that's where we end up getting stuck. Because I'm like, whether it was your intention or not, I'm upset. And he's like, okay, I'm sorry, but can you understand why I said it? And that's the back and forth. And we've got to an amazing place now where we barely argue about anything because everything, we just blame it on the language barrier. If one of us fucks up, we're like, oh, it's the old language barrier.
It's interesting that you bring up perception though, because to bring it back to the love is producer thing that we initially were talking about.
Producer Keisha, she's like, let's
Keisha's
get back on track.
Get back on track, you motherfuckers. Why are we talking about your argument styles?
I just think it's interesting because I'm so all about therapy. I'm all about people going and sorting their mental health. I've had diagnosed mental health issues for years and years and years. I'm all about it. And I think the reason I feel the need to say that is because I've spoken in a very negative way. Because what I've referred to, I think, is the use of therapy to shift the perception of the way that someone else sees you. And that's what I have a bit of a problem with, not the actual therapy or the fact that people are trying to work on themselves. So in the situation that unfolded with Stephen and Monica, what I thought was the most interesting part is that he kind of drip fed these few things about therapy. And I feel as though he did that in a way to change the way that she saw him. I thought that he did it in a way to kind of prove that he was emotionally mature, that he was willing to work on relationships if they had problems, if you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that some people, it's very manipulative. And I'm not saying he's done it manipulatively.
Yeah, I don't even know if he did it deliberately.
Yeah. But
I think he did.
I think there are people out there who use their shortcomings or the things that they've done in past relationships and they use honesty around it as a way of showing vulnerability and gaining trust.
The reason I think that this was pure manipulation in this particular scene is because he went for the maximum amount of emotion for the minimal amount of hurt infliction. And what I mean by that is he was like, I need to talk to you about cheating, something I did. I'm so not proud of it. Like, it was horrible what I did, but I just didn't feel good enough. And I'm going to therapy now, but I messaged a girl. Like, his cheating was that he messaged a girl. So he's trying to manipulate Monica to be like, I can't believe I stooped so low, but I'm working on it. So she's thinking, fuck, what's he done? And then he's done this bait and switch. So she's like, in her own head, her internal monologue would be like, wow, like that's what you think is bad. You categorize bad as just messaging a girl, knowing that probably highly likely Monica has been cheated on horrifically, which she actually has. So now her unconscious bias is like, wow, he thinks this is the worst thing he could do is message a girl and he's working on that. Bingo, I've got a catch. So that's what I think he has done.
Look at that.
That is very interesting.
Detective Brittany on the case.
Yeah, maximum emotion for the minimal amount of pain infliction.
That's really interesting. Last night we put up a couple polls on the Life Uncut Instagram story, and one of the questions was, have you ever dated someone who used the fact that they went to therapy as a way to prove their emotional maturity? And only 11% of people said that they had, which felt quite low. We also put a little question box on there for people to kind of share their experiences if they wanted to. And the most interesting thing, I thought this was really, really funny. The most common response that we got was that people had in fact done that themselves. Like they had, I don't know if they had realized that they had done it until they'd read the question, but a lot of people were like, oh, wow, I've just realized I actually do this.
I'm the problem.
I use it as a way.
At least they're self-aware.
Totally. Maybe because they've been in therapy.
I thought this was interesting. A lot of responses we received was for the people who had, they acted as though it meant that they were above being questioned or held accountable because they had done the work and they knew better. So it gave them this sense of superiority within the relationship because they couldn't be wrong because they'd been to therapy.
I think that actually goes back to what you were saying about gaslighting. I think a word like that is authoritative.
100%.
But people use it also as an excuse as to why they are doing bad behavior. So in a relationship, like as long as you're going to therapy, you can use that. I'm working on it. I'm in therapy. Like I'm trying. I know I've been an asshole for a year, but I'm in therapy, so I'm trying. It doesn't mean anything. Like therapy only works if you want it to work. You have to be so proactive. Just going there so that you can throw the term around doesn't mean anything.
Funny you mentioned excuses, Britt, because that was the last slide that we put up last night with a poll. We asked if people use their time in therapy as an excuse to avoid accountability. Again, a pretty low percentage. It was only 14% who had, but here are some of the responses. He went to therapy for professional evidence that he was fucked up and couldn't help mistreating me.
Wow.
My ex started therapy as a way to keep me after I found out that he had cheated on me. I've experienced that. Used to say things like, I brought this up with my therapist and they agreed with me. My therapist said that it's likely you have validation issues from your childhood and that's why you are needy.
Wow. Imagine being diagnosed by someone secondhand because they've talked about you in therapy. Thanks for that, pal.
Cheers for that. Got daddy issues. Apparently, my ex's therapist told him that he cheated on me because he wasn't loved enough as a child. And he used to use it as an excuse to always be the victim and repeated that I simply wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Speaking of victim, the only thing that we haven't touched on yet that grinds my gears, I get it. I get that there are people out there that are going to live like this. But his comment at the start where he said, she just was too good for me. Like I
felt like I didn't deserve her.
I felt like I didn't deserve her, which is why I cheated on her. I just find that 99% of the time such a piss weak fake excuse. Like if you truly didn't think you deserved someone and you had this absolute queen that wants to be with you and does everything right, you worship her. Like you worship your relationship. I think it's an excuse that's similar to it's not you, it's me. Like it's like I just don't want to be with you. I cheated on you because I don't really particularly want to be with you right now. It's not because you thought she was too good for you. I'm sorry, but I'm calling bullshit on whatever his name is, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, like it's punishing someone for your own inadequacies is what it is. But I think that this would be more common than what maybe we're giving credit to. And what I mean by that is for anyone who has been cheated on, the two very common explanations for it is one, I didn't feel good enough or worthy enough. And also the second one is I didn't feel loved enough or connect enough in the relationship. There is always some sort of reasoning. I mean, the third one is just that I'm lacking in empathy and I'm a sociopath and I like to, once again, throwing terms around. But it's lacking in the ability to have empathy or care for your relationship because that does exist as well. But it's hard to unpack which one of those things is the reason. And maybe it's a little bit of a combination of all of them sometimes. But on your point, Britt, I agree. I think if I was in a relationship now with somebody who used that as an excuse, part of me, I think it does muster sympathy. It does make you be like, no, but you are good enough for this relationship. It makes you, as the person who has had something done to you, who has been cheated on or whatever, it makes you want to fight for the relationship, makes you want to almost fight to prove to that person that what you have together is worthy of them.
And that they are worthy.
And that they are worthy of it as well. It would make me question now, because of what I know I want in my life, it would make me question whether or not I had the capacity or the drive to try and prove to someone that they're worthy of the relationship that they're in. Like, do I have that mental load and care to do that? Not anymore.
I also don't want to take away the fact that actually happens. Like it does happen, and people that don't feel good enough, it is a real reason. Like I do want to validate it. I just think it gets thrown around too much as well. I've had people say that to me, and I have had that feeling as well. Like I was in a relationship, I remember, I've spoken about it a few years ago, very early on. We dated for 3 months when I was living in England. I was so into it. He was really into me. It was going really well. And then I found out that his family were billionaires. Like they were in the top richest people. And he didn't tell me that. I just did a stalk. Like I just Googled him, because I was like, wanted to find out more, because he was every time I would ask questions, he was a bit elusive. And it was obviously because he wanted to protect the fact that his family had money, which I totally get. And the second I found out, I self-sabotaged that relationship because I didn't feel good enough. I was like,
You didn't cheat on the guy.
No, but what I'm saying is I can understand when people say they get that feeling of not feeling good enough. And I was like, I will not fit into that life. I'm not good enough to be in that world. And I had that feeling. But it didn't relay into cheating and me being a dickhead. I was just like, oh, this isn't the relationship for me. There's part of me that regrets, would love $1 billion, but I've got Ben, so we won't go into that too much.
I think what I hate about that the most, though, is that so often, and I am going to be talking in like gender stereotypes here, so often I think men use that as a weapon against successful women. Oh, you're achieving so much and I just didn't feel like I was good enough in this relationship. And that's why I was seeking validation from other girls on Instagram or like, I get really frustrated because I see that narrative play out a lot. I've seen it happen in my own life, when I've had various successes and the people that I was dating were really envious of that and used it as a way to like justify their shitty behavior, which only made me feel worse because I was like, well, I'm trying to strive and succeed and you're using this as a reason for why you've cheated on me. Like you've implied that I'm at fault for that.
I think that in order to like wrap this up, one thing that is very evident is like, although therapy is great, it certainly isn't the green flag in dating. It definitely doesn't mean that someone's got everything figured out. It certainly doesn't mean that that person is emotionally or mentally at a place of nirvana where you've hit the jackpot. And I think as well, like if somebody is bringing it up early in your dating or using it as a way to garner sympathy for things that they have done in the past or as an excuse of how that they've bettered themselves from the things they've done in their past, don't discredit it. I'm not saying that everything is something to be like alert and alarmed, but like, have the blinkers well and truly aware of what could be happening and how those conversations could be unfolding.
Well, I haven't finished it yet, so I don't know if Stephen and Monica end up together. I don't know if this little tidbit of therapy manipulation is going to like get him the home run, but I'll keep you posted. And if you guys have watched it, don't send me spoilers.